Thank you all for being here. I'm glad that I'm here today with Mary Pat. One, because everybody likes her more than they like me, so it's always good for me to have her with me. But also because you should all know, and I remind people this whenever we get a chance to come to Portsmouth, this is the place where Mary Pat and I chose to spend our first wedding anniversary in March of 1987. And we came here to Portsmouth. I was still a law student at the time. Mary Pat was a very junior person on Wall Street. We got into her car and drove up here to Portsmouth to spend the weekend at a bed and breakfast. And so we've always had extraordinary memories of not just New Hampshire, but of this particular town. So it's good to be back in Portsmouth. And when we were riding in the car through downtown, I could tell that Mary Pat was getting definitely reminiscent about when we were up here all those years ago. I'm not going to speak for a long time. I'll just do a couple of things off the top, and then I really want to get your questions about what's on your mind. First, I just got back from Israel, and I don't think at the time that we're in right now and what's going on there that I can start anything. So I would summarize it by saying to you it's both sad and infuriating. It was sad because I met with lots of people who have been suffering since October 7th. They lost loved ones on that day. Loved ones were kidnapped. I met with families of kidnapped men and women who are still somewhere in Gaza. They hope alive, and they're hoping to get some word on their return. One of those families gave me and Mary Pat these medallions that we've been carrying around ever since. It says, "Bring them home now." I met with the parents of a 19-year-old young man who is a joint Israeli-United States citizen who was captured that day. He's a soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces, and he was guarding the border in Gaza and was taken out of his tank. And the last time they saw his cell phone, it was geolocated inside Gaza, and they haven't heard from him since October 7th. Another was the family of a grandmother and grandfather. Her daughter was with me. She had dropped her son off, her 8-year-old son off, to spend an afternoon with his grandparents. The terrorists came and kidnapped all 3 of them. So not only is she missing her mother and father, but she's now missing her 8-year-old son and has not heard from them since October 7th. That's the sad part. The infuriating part was watching a 43-minute video that the government put together from raw footage of the attacks. And it's not just the inhumanity that was rained all over people, but it's the joy that the terrorists displayed in raining that inhumanity down on them, dancing around dead bodies that they had just killed. Shooting a family, a mother and father, who were surrounding their 2 children and hugging them to try to shield them. They were all shot dead and then doused with gasoline and burned to the point where when they were discovered, they were melted. The 4 bodies were melted together. There was an intercepted cell phone call from a terrorist back to his parents in Gaza, and he said, "Mom, your son just killed 10 Jews with his bare hands. Your son's a hero." And the parents were cheering on the other end of the phone. I want people out there who are listening to this, who the media will convey this to, who are asking for a ceasefire, to think about just those examples. There was a ceasefire on October 6th, and it was Hamas that broke it on October 7th. It killed 1,200 Israeli civilians. And the last story I'll give you about it is of an extraordinarily brave father in a kibbutz. They had closed-circuit television inside their home and in their backyard for security. And what we saw was the father running out of the back of the house with his 8-year-old son and his 6-year-old son in his arms. They ran to a bomb shelter. Most of these homes have bomb shelters. He ran to the bomb shelter, closed the door. 15 seconds later, 2 terrorists came in the backyard. They shot the door open with their semi-automatic weapons and then threw a grenade into this small bomb shelter. The next thing you saw was the father diving. He dove onto the grenade. to save his sons. He was murdered. His sons came out full, one of them of his father's blood. The other, shrapnel, had gotten out from under the father and taken out his left eye. And the 8-year-old took his little brother by the hand, crying into the house. The 6-year-old was saying, I can't see, I can't see. And the 8-year-old was saying to him, don't worry about that, Daddy is dead. While they're sobbing in their kitchen, the 2 terrorists come in, go into their refrigerator, take out Cokes, and sit down and drink Coke from their refrigerator, as if they were 2 invited guests to a fall picnic in their backyard. You can't negotiate with people like that. You can't. And we need to stand against that, and with the people of Israel. And so I'm really glad that I went there and saw it for myself, and spoke to those people and others that I don't have time to tell you about them. Maybe we can talk about it later if you're interested. And so I think anybody who wants to be President of the United States needs to go and see it for themselves. I don't think you can make wise decisions on behalf of this country on what we should be doing with Israel in that region if you don't see it for yourself. And if you don't believe that everyone in the bad part of the world is involved, I saw weapons that were seized from the terrorists by the Israeli Defense Forces with the markings of the Russian government on them, the markings of the Iranian government on them, and the markings of the North Korean government on them. These evil actors are all in this together, everybody. They're all helping each other to try to create tumult in the world and diminish America's place in the world. The second thing I'll say, and then take questions from you on anything, is that all of this stuff going on, we have people in our country and people in our party who are trying to say, you know, what America first really means is that we deal with our own problems and we don't worry about the problems of the rest of the world. That we need to basically not get involved in Israel, not get involved in Ukraine, or anywhere else in the world, because we have problems at the southern border, and we have problems with our debt, and we have problems with our education system, all of which are true. But the America I know, the type of America I'd like to lead, is the one that historically has done it all. And we have. We sacrificed and we've done things to lead not only ourselves but the world. Everyone's for America first. But I'm not for America alone. And America will never be first if we're alone. The thing that's made us first is not only our own work ethic, our own ingenuity, our own innovation, but also the friends that we have made all around the world who stand with us and we with them against the evil, authoritarian dictators like Xi in China, who's just been in our country, like Putin in Russia, like the mullahs in Iran, like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And I want a country that once again remembers how lucky we are to be here. That being an American citizen is a gift. It's a gift, and people are dying to come here. And that part of what goes along with that gift of great freedom, great opportunity, great liberty, is to also be the country, the indispensable country that leads the world. So I don't think you can come to any other conclusion, commonsensically, that America has to lead. Because if we don't believe it, that guy that was just over here in San Francisco, President Xi in China, he'd be happy to lead the world. And I don't think we want the communist Chinese leading the world. So we have sacrifices to make. But you know, we had to make them in 1776. You took a poll in 1776, believe me, independence wouldn't have won. The unsafe with the crown would have won. But we had leaders who pushed us to sacrifice, and we got a country out of it. The easiest thing to do in 1861 would have been to let the South go. But Lincoln said, no, we will sacrifice to keep the country together. And we came out a richer, freer, bigger, stronger country than we would have been otherwise. The same thing in 1941 when we were attacked by Japan. We didn't turn our back. We went, 500,000 Americans sacrificed their lives to rid the world of Hitler and the other dictators. And we came out of that bigger and stronger and freer. And we're Ronald Reagan did the same thing for us, taking on the Soviet Union. So we've seen these moments before. And when we've had presidents who are willing to go big and have America lead, we always come out on the back end better. And I fear that if we continue to go small, pit ourselves against each other in a fight for the crumbs here, we are going to miss out on the opportunity to make the next 2 generations as lucky as we've been to be Americans. So I was inspired by that trip about what our role in the world needs to be and what it will take for us to get there, but I believe we can get there, and that's where I want to lead us. So there's lots of stuff to talk about, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Raise your hand, happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
I actually have a little question and some comments. I heard you talk at Portsmouth Rover, and you convinced me to be Haley. But I have people who I talked to about why I'm supporting you, and they said, but other people went to jail for Bridgegate, and I think that needs to be clarified. You need to pick out a better nickname for Donald Duck that's not bad enough. and I think you need to make the number reasonable to people, not saying $7 trillion that Trump did, but make it for a taxpayer. I don't know if it's $100,000 that we all owe because of him, but make it so the general public can understand the number.
Great. All right, so I'll do the math later. I'll come back to you with a better number. On the Donald Duck thing, you get on stage and try to come up with something better than that. I thought it was pretty good. But I'll keep working at it. We got another debate in December. We'll see what I come up with then. And look, on the first part, I want to remind you something respectfully that you're wrong. No one went to jail for Bridgegate. In fact, the United States Supreme Court dismissed all of those cases 9-0, that it was prosecutorial misconduct by the Obama Justice Department, what they did. And so no one went to jail for it. And in fact, when you get Clarence Thomas and the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg to agree on anything, you know something was really bad. And they agreed that it was prosecutorial misconduct, and they dismissed those cases 9-0. Now, those people deserve to be fired for what they did, and I fired them when I found out what they did. But nobody went to jail. And in fact, when, in the end, objective people got to take a look at it, they determined that there was no crimes committed at all by anybody. Stupidity, yes. Crimes, no. And so they deserve never to work in government again, and they won't. But they didn't deserve to go to jail. No one did. And thank goodness for our Supreme Court, 9-0, they did the right thing. And I think that tells you also something about our justice system. You know, you have Donald Trump running around saying how unfair it is all the time. Two-tiered system of justice and all the rest. And I'm certainly not here to say it's perfect. It's not. I was a victim of it during Bridgegate. And the Supreme Court fixed it. And so, in the end, we have to have confidence in it for one reason and one reason only. It's not perfect, but it's the best imperfect system the world's ever seen. And the people in our party and in our country continue to undercut all of our institutions of government are going to be left with a state of anarchy. And people get more and more angry, and they gin them up. And guys like Trump and Vivek, who just want to gin people up and get them angry because they think it helps them politically. I've never been that way. I get plenty angry, as you guys have seen sometimes. But my anger is always geared towards trying to get something done, not just towards getting people angry to get a vote. And I think that kind of cynicism in our party and in our country needs to be eradicated. And that's part of why I'm running. So, thanks for raising it. Other questions? Come on. Hey. I got Maria. Claire?
I'm curious about, given the appalling cycle of violence that's gone on in the Middle East for how many decades, if you were president, what would you specifically do to try and change the current trajectory? And I want to ask that specifically in reference to Iran. What would you do about Iran?
I think the best way to contain Iran is to isolate Iran. And by that I mean getting more and more of the reasonable Arab countries to make agreements with Israel. Now, one of the things I'll give Donald Trump credit for was getting the Abraham Accords with the UAE, with Morocco. We already had agreements with Jordan and with Egypt. And I think the more of these countries that we can get to have friendly relationships with Israel, Iran, whose only goal is to wipe Israel off the map, becomes more and more and more isolated. I don't think you're going to necessarily do it by military action. I think you have to do it by putting more and more economic and diplomatic pressure on them to make them understand that it's not going to work. Second thing, we have to fix the Palestinian problem. And I think that this has once again shown that the delay that the Trump administration and the Biden administration put on a two-state solution contributed to what's going on right now. And so getting those more reasonable Arab countries to isolate Iran and then work with Israel to get that two-state solution. It won't be perfect because there's always going to be some hostility there. But then the Palestinians will have their own territory to govern, and they're going to be responsible for it. Rather than the Iranians, Hamas, Hezbollah, ginning people up in the West Bank and in Gaza towards violence because they say they're being repressed. Let's work on a two-state solution that allows them to vote, govern themselves, however they want to do it. And as long as they're not being violent towards their neighbors, then we can move on. The last thing is we have to make Iran very, very clear about the fact that them having a nuclear weapon is a non-starter for us. And if that would be the only way that I would want to take military action with Iran. If I became convinced from the intelligence that Iran was very, very close to developing a nuclear weapon, we'd have to take action because, as you see, with the kind of inhumanity based upon a perversion of Islam, because Islam is not a violent religion. It is being made violent by these people. They're using it as a way to weaponize their own power. So, if they became very close to it, then I think we have to consider taking military action against them because they blackmail us with that nuclear weapon and our friends. And we can't have that. So those are the ways that I would approach it with Iran in the Middle East. And I think if you're able to execute on all three of those ways, you make the region more peaceful than it is now. You make them responsible for governing amongst themselves because the relationships that they will have signed and develop. And you isolate Iran with Iran knowing now that not only we're against them and their mission and their goal, which is to wipe Israel off the map, but if you can get Saudi Arabia to agree, if you can get Qatar to agree, then where are they going? Who are going to be their allies in this? And then they have a real military problem because if all of us are together in the region, there's no place for them to go. So that's the way I'd approach it. And I think there's a greater sense of urgency to it now than there has been for years because of what's just happened recently. And I think it was a missed opportunity going all the way back to George W. Bush and through. They didn't push it through to a conclusion. Some of that has been the fault of people in the region, including Israel. But some of it's been the fault of the United States not making it a priority. But every time something like this happens, we go, oh wow, we really need to get to that. Well, it's time we need to get to it and get it fixed.
So, Governor, there are a number of people here in the room, or people who have businesses that are in, Joni, Yvonne's in business locally, Eric, and then another few folks here are retired.
Yes.
And one of the things that I know I'm feeling, and I'll bet you're feeling, is the pressure on the continued inflation that continues, and risks of the Democratic administration recommending raising taxes. Could you talk to inflation?
Yeah, look, raising taxes is not going to do anything but raise inflation. It's going to give the government more money to spend, and they've already risen $34 trillion in debt. I'm working on the math, I promise. But $34 trillion in debt. Look, we need to go the other direction, which is continue the taxes at the levels they're at now. Keep the Trump era tax cuts when they expire in 2025. But we need to reduce spending and reduce it significantly. And, at a minimum, we should be back to pre-COVID spending. COVID spending was at a ridiculous level because we were in a ridiculous crisis. And we need to help people. But Democrats now say, well, we'd like to keep going at this rate. Well, it makes no sense to do that. Just bringing back to pre-COVID spending would cut more than $1 trillion off of our spending just by doing that. And so we have to do that at a minimum. Once we do that, we add to that the issue of energy. And folks know about the energy problem more than people in New Hampshire, in New England. You have been cut off from the natural gas revolution in this country because of liberal Democratic politicians in New York and otherwise will not allow pipelines to be built up here. And so you're stuck in the home heating oil issue, which becomes a huge driver of inflation in this region in particular. So we need to go to an energy policy in this country which is truly all of the above. Not like verbally all of the above, but truly all of the above. So what do I mean? I would have a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission which would use its authority to allow there to be safe pipelines built to every part of this country. This country has an enormous abundance of natural gas. It's a safer fuel, both in terms of its use and in terms of its effect on the environment. And everybody who wants to have access to it should have access to it. Second, in my home state, you wouldn't believe this, but the most densely populated state in the country, New Jersey, 53% of our electricity is generated by nuclear. We've been generating nuclear power safely for 45 years in the most densely populated state in the country. If we can do it there, you can certainly do it here. We can do it any place in the country. And that has no impact on our carbon footprint, no impact on the climate change that everybody is concerned about. And so we need to, once again, have a federal government which encourages the development of nuclear energy. Third, we need to open up the development of our oil in this country. Not only could we become energy independent again, but we could be a net energy exporter to the rest of the world. And that squeezes Putin and his oil, and it squeezes Iran and their oil. And that's a positive thing for us by keeping their revenue down, and the money they have to create war and mischief around the world would be less. All of those things have an effect on inflation. How? Well, if you know there's more energy available, every bit of energy is a futures market. If they know more energy is coming, prices go down. And so it's an immediate impact. I had an argument on the debate with Lester Holt. He said, no, I want something that's going to help immediately. I'm like, well, Lester, you don't understand the way the futures market works. If we announce tomorrow that we're reducing the 2 million barrels of oil a day that the Biden administration is not allowing us to produce in North Dakota alone, the price of oil would go down $10 a barrel. And what that impact would have on prices at the gasoline pump and what it would do to inflation is everything we get is affected by energy. Everything you pay in the supermarket, that stuff is trucked there. And if they pay more for gas and diesel, they're adding it on to the $4.50 you're paying for a gallon of milk right now, and what you're paying for a loaf of bread and all the rest. So energy and an energy policy that broadens things will help to bring inflation down immediately. The lowering of spending will take care of long-term interest rates, because as spending goes down, interest rates will go down as well. And right now, interest rates, as all of you know, are crippling both business, who want to borrow money to expand, and they're crippling young people who want to buy their first homes or their first cars, or are paying interest on their student loans. These are all things that the interest rates are having a huge impact on. And that kills people's hope. So we need to do it for that reason. And look, I have experience doing this. When I became governor of New Jersey, I inherited an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget. So the deficit was more than a third of the total budget. And every Democrat said I was going to have to raise taxes to fix it. Instead, what we did was go to zero-based budgeting, make every government department come in and start at zero and justify to meet every bit of spending they did. What was the result of that? In our first year, we eliminated 832 programs. And we balanced the budget without raising taxes. We kept it balanced for the next 8 years and didn't raise taxes at all during my 8 years as governor. We're proud of that, but I want you to understand what it's going to mean. If we do a similar type of program at the federal level, I suspect my popularity will take the same kind of hit that it took in New Jersey. I went from 55% popularity before the budget cuts to 38%. Because every one of those programs had a constituency. Someone who benefited from the program, thought it was a good thing, and so you have to be willing as a leader to take that hit. Because 3 years later, I got reelected with 61% of the vote. Because people said I didn't agree with every one of his decisions, but man, he kept his word. We elected him, he told us what he was going to do, and he actually did it. And now we can't really get mad at him for doing what we elected him to do. People think there's common sense among voters, and they get it. And so it'll happen on steroids if we have this happen at the federal level when I'm president, and the Democrats will gin the anger against me. But I'm ready for it. And I think we can't kick the can down the road anymore on this. There's going to come a moment, everybody, when people don't want to buy our debt anymore. And then we're in big trouble. Remember this. Next year, we are going to pay $1 trillion in debt service for the year. $1 trillion just to pay interest on our debt before we spend the first dollar from the federal government. We can't continue to do that. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so on the south border, which I think is the more acute problem at the moment, let me tell you what my solutions are at first. We're not going to shoot them stone cold dead at the border. And we're not sending the American army into Mexico. Okay? I heard that on the stage on Wednesday night in Miami from TV tough guy Ron DeSantis. And it sounds really great, right? I'm going to shoot them stone cold dead. The guy from Tallahassee with his cowboy boots on, right? Guess what? It's not going to happen. By the way, you know what he also said Wednesday night? This one, I was standing there and I actually wrote it down on my pad because I couldn't believe it. He said the wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and Mexico's going to pay for it. Now, like, look, many of us were naive enough to actually believe that promise from Donald Trump 8 years ago. Even Donald Trump now said, well, I never really had any way to make Mexico pay for it. Like, calling us stupid for believing it. And DeSantis doubled down on it. I'm going to build the wall and finish it, but you're going to pay for it. All of us. I think it's a smart investment for us to make, but we're going to have to pay for it. Mexico's not going to pay for us to build a wall on our property any more than you would pay for your neighbor to build a fence on their property. But here's what we will do. It's a complicated problem, and I do 5 things. First, just understand how big the problem is. In the last 11 months, we've averaged 200,000 illegal encounters a month. You know how many detention beds we have at the border? 38,000. So, talk about a math problem. That's a big math problem. So, first thing I do is sign an executive order to send the National Guard to the border to partner with Customs and Border Patrol. At 200,000 encounters a month, they are overwhelmed. They don't have enough manpower to be able to do what needs to be done to stop people from coming in. So we need to send our National Guard down there. That's an appropriate use of our National Guard to guard our national border. Second, I would double the number of detention beds from 38,000 to 80,000 so that we have beds to be able to detain people while we figure out what their status is going to be. Third, when we determine that people are asking for asylum, our laws require them to have an asylum hearing. Well, you know how long you have to wait for an asylum hearing now? 4 years. So this is what happens. They say, you have to come back for an asylum hearing. Come back to El Paso in 4 years. Till then, we'll see you. Well, who's coming back to El Paso in 4 years? They're getting into this big continental country and they're never coming back. So we need to make those asylum hearings less than a year. And then we can detain people during that period of time. The only way to do that is triple the number of immigration judges. We don't have enough judges to hear these cases by a long shot. So we have to triple the number of judges. I would do that too. Fourth, I would add 10,000 Customs and Border Patrol officers to be able to ease the National Guard back to its other duties. But that's going to take a year to do, I'll tell you the truth. You got to recruit them, you have to train them, and then deploy them. So anybody that tells you you're going to do it on day one is full of it. Because who they get? They're going to, wave a magic wand and produce the 10,000 people? It can happen in a year, but it can't happen faster than that. And then fifth and final, we've got to change our immigration laws. We haven't done that for 40 years. We have 6 million open jobs in this country right now, in this economy. 6 million open jobs. That means those are jobs that Americans either don't want to do or can't do. So every time we've had that problem in our history as we grow, we've brought immigrants in who wanted to do those jobs and had skills to do those jobs. So let's put those folks to the front of the line. Let's have a merit-based immigration system that says, if you have the skill set and the desire to do this particular industry, where we have a lot of open jobs, you go to the front of the line. And you come in, and you're going to pay taxes, and you're going to learn English, and those are going to be the requirements that you come in here and get a job where you can then take some of that money and send it back to your families and whatever country you come from. We also need to have E-Verify for all of our employers so that they know who they're hiring. It's not fair for them. The honest ones sometimes get hoodwinked, and the dishonest ones hoodwink us. So we need E-Verify. But the honest truth is, to get those two things, which Democrats don't want either, we're going to have to give them something. Because we're going to need 60 votes in the United States Senate to get anything done. So don't listen to all these people saying, I'm going to force it through. That's what we've been listening to for 40 years, and nobody's done it. So I'm going to have to give them something. I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it's something on Dreamers. Maybe it's something on Path to Citizenship. I don't know. But I'll know when it's a good deal. And then I'll make the deal. But we can't sit here any longer digging our heels into the dirt and think it's going to change. All we're going to do is keep arguing with each other. And so it's a complicated problem. And by the way, the same principles apply to the northern border, but the problem's not as acute there. Now, what we have to look out for is, as we tighten the southern border, is it going to shift to the northern border? So that we have to use intelligence capability and technology to be monitoring on a regular basis what's going on up here at the northern border. So I wouldn't put all the resources north that we're putting south right away, but hopefully what we do is tighten things to the south, which will allow us to shift resources to the north if they try their entry point to be coming from the north, because we made it too tight in the south for them, not too tight for us. So that's the way I would do it. It's complicated. It's something you can't do necessarily really well in a minute and a half answer on a debate stage. And so instead what you get is finish them, shoot them stone cold dead. I'm going to send the army in there. We've had enough of TV tough guys running for president of the United States and making those promises to us. Because what we now know is they don't keep them. Let's make promises we can keep, and then people will be a lot happier. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Governor, what would you view about the people who have already crossed in the last few years, the millions who are here and displaced here?
I think it's a combination. I think some of the more recent ones, you're going to have to keep them gathered where they are and send them back. And what those numbers are is kind of hard to tell at this point, but I'm sure that amounts to at least 1 million people, given just the number of encounters we're talking about over time. For people who have been here a lot of years, the idea, and I heard Governor DeSantis say this too, that the estimate is 7 to 8 million illegal immigrants in the country. He said he could round them all up and send them all back. Back to where exactly? Back to their home countries? Okay, try to figure that out. And think about the logistical task that law enforcement will have to do to round up 7 or 8 million people, round them up and take them where? Where are we going to stage them? Then how are we going to transport them? How many airplanes, buses are we going to need to move these people depending upon where we're sending them? So I'm very skeptical about the idea of once you get more than about 1 million people, about this mass deportation that both DeSantis and Trump are talking about. Again, it sounds really tough, but they never give you the next sentence. I'm going to deport them. How? How are you going to do it? I remember back when it was about 4 million, the statistic was that if you wanted to bust them back over the southern border and start sending it down to Central America, that you would need to have school buses, which hold generally 50 people, back to back from Seattle to Los Angeles, back to back, to fit all those people. So my point is, we've got to figure out a way to get about 1 million of them that are recent. And of course, we should end all this sanctuary city and sanctuary state stuff. If you have a criminal record, you go to jail. And when after you get out of jail, you go out of the country. That's easy. You get them on a bus to the jail, and then when they're out of jail, you put them back on the bus, and you take them to the airport, and you send them out. We should not be allowing anybody who commits crimes in this country or has a criminal record on the way in from staying here. So as we break it down, there'll be a lot of people we're going to be able to get rid of that way. And getting rid of sanctuary cities and sanctuary states will be a big part of it. And what I would do as president is say, you want to be a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state, you can be, but you get no federal aid. You got that much money that you can pay for illegal people, and look what's happening now. I'm by New York all the time. Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul say, help us, help us. Hey man, you're the one who said you were a sanctuary city and sanctuary state. Now they're here. They loved it when it was cheap and easy. Nobody was coming. They could play to the grandstand and look at they had a big heart. Now, when everyone's showing up in New York, it's costing New York hundreds of millions of dollars a month. They just added this year in September, 8,000 students to schools just of illegal immigrants who have come there in the last year. Huge cost.
So if I could follow up, how do you see a really good absorption of these people into the country? Because clearly, we have a wide war.
Well, look, I think that there are going to be some people who don't want to become citizens, and some people who you have to look to for work visas and those type of things, some of them seasonal, some of them year-round, depending on what jobs they have. There are going to be some people who are interested in becoming citizens. Well, then that'd be part of that negotiation that I talked about before, to say what rules are we going to put around that? What requirements are we going to make of them? Pay all your back taxes. Learn English. Do the things you need to do, and which, by the way, we've always required of immigrants to do if they were going to come to this country. So it'll be a combination of those things along with deportation. And you know what? There's going to be some of them that will just disappear into the continental country that we just won't be able to find. And given all the other crime problems we have in this country, I have to tell you, I don't want to make law enforcement's exclusive task in this country rounding up people here illegally to deal with them. We've got lots of other criminal elements to deal with in this country that I want our police officers and our federal agents to focus on as well. Jethro?
I'd be disappointed to leave if you didn't address the candidate whose odds on favor to have the Republican nomination.
Yeah, most of the time it doesn't take me this long to get to Donald Trump directly. But I was just trying to answer all the questions. Look, he is fundamentally unqualified to be President of the United States by his own conduct. His own conduct. And look, I endorsed him in 2016. I worked for him. I voted for him. And I wouldn't change my mind about that because I didn't want Hillary Clinton to be president either. And I hoped we were going to make him a better president. And lots of good people worked with him to try to make it better. But when someone simply doesn't want to listen, when someone just wants to be completely self-absorbed and self-consumed, which is what he is, then they're unteachable. And they can't be made better. And the damage that he's created for our country is significant, in my view, and long-lasting. When he stood behind the seal of the president in the East Room of the White House on election 2020 and said the election had been stolen, when he knew it wasn't, he convinced tens of millions of Americans that the election was rigged. And I tell you, I meet people like that every day who believe it to this day. Because they say, well, he's the President of the United States, he must know something we don't know. He didn't. In fact, he knew exactly what we did. And he's now being prosecuted. And I want folks to understand as a practical matter what's going to happen. Because I did this for 7 years. I ran the 5th largest prosecuting office in this country in New Jersey for 7 years. And what's going to happen is his trial is going to start the day before Super Tuesday. Not far from now, March 4th. And he's going to probably be on trial for about 6 weeks. And he's going to be convicted. And the reason I'm confident of it is because of who's going to testify against him. The single biggest development in this campaign as to Donald Trump was when it was announced that Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, has signed a cooperation agreement with the government and gotten immunity. Immunity, everybody. Let me tell you when we give immunity as prosecutors. When you have evidence that's so good that it's going to convict the person, and I can't get it anyplace else. Well, it would make sense that would come from his chief of staff. The man who was Velcroed to his hip for the entire 2020 campaign and the aftermath. And Mark Meadows is already, some of his testimony's gotten out there, he's going to say that Donald Trump knew he was lying on election night, that he had been told by everybody that he had lost, and he said, I don't care, I'm saying I won anyway. And then enlisted all of them, including Meadows, to commit crimes to try to obstruct the certification of the election and overturn it to keep him in power. If he testifies that way at trial, and I believe he will, or they wouldn't have given him immunity and a deal to do it, a jury, I believe, is going to convict Donald Trump. And then we're going to have a circumstance if he's going to be our nominee. We're going to have a nominee for President of the United States who can't vote for himself. He's a convicted felon. When you are a convicted felon federally in this country, you lose your right to vote. So imagine, we could have a nominee who can't vote for himself. A nominee who, if he were elected president, would be in jail. Adams, Jefferson, Washington, Hamilton are spinning in their graves, looking at us and going, wake up. This isn't what we meant. And if we knew that any of you would actually consider voting for someone like this, we would have put it in the Constitution. You can't be a federal felon and be President of the United States. We didn't think you people would miss that part, but okay. That's the deal. And who could be selfish enough to put this country through this? To say that his desire to go back to the White House is more important than giving our country a president who is not subject to imprisonment. It's outrageous. And let me tell you, you're it. The state is going to decide this. You all vote for Donald Trump, he is going to very likely be the nominee of this party. And you're going to have nobody else to blame but yourselves. And it's not like, look, I understand Nikki Haley says he's the right president at the right time. She'd be inclined to pardon him. She thinks he deserved a break after January 6th. How are we considering somebody like this? She raised her hand on the stage and said, even if he's a convicted felon, I will support him. And so did Ron DeSantis. And so did Vivek. I won't mention the other guys because they dropped out now. So we'll leave them lying over here. But there's essentially 4 of us left. Me, Nikki, Ron, and Vivek. To take on Trump. Only one of them wants to take on Trump. You watched that debate the other night? It's like he's Voldemort from the Harry Potter books. He who shall not be named. The questioners didn't ask about him. Those guys don't talk about him. I'm the only one who talked about him on the stage. Let's talk about it for vastly a practical political approach. I went to the Republican Party at Florida's convention a week ago Saturday. I went up there and talked about Donald Trump. They booed the hell out of him. You know what I said in return? The truth is coming. You can boo all you want. But the truth in this country is always what wins out. And the truth is coming. And so if you want to be president of the United States, and you're Nikki Haley, and you're afraid to get booed, so guess what she did? She canceled on the Republican Party in Florida. The only candidate who didn't show up. Doesn't mention him on the debate stage. Well, if you're afraid of that, how are you going to do against President Xi? How are you going to do against Putin? How are you going to do against Kim Jong-un? How are you going to do facing down Chuck Schumer in the Congress? I mean, she is a very nice woman, comes from a red state where she had a compliant Republican legislature, and did whatever she wanted for the 6 years she decided to stay, of 8 years, and then go up to New York and live in the Waldorf Astoria and be the UN ambassador. Good for her. But I have to tell you, it doesn't prepare you for the rough and tumble of this job, and you got to question someone's integrity when they are willing to speak out of both sides of their mouth. I don't think he's the right president now. I thought he was the right president then. I think what he did was horrible. I'd be inclined to pardon him. I think we should give him a break. I mean, I don't know. I'm dizzy listening to her answers. And just think about what she did just yesterday. She said anybody who's on social media should have to give their name. Now, I don't know. I'd like to remind everybody that the Federalist Papers, which formed the Constitution of this country, were anonymous. They were anonymous for a reason. Hamilton and Madison, who were the two main writers of the Federalist Papers, didn't want their personal baggage to burden the argument. They want people to decide on the argument. There's a lot of reasons people want to be anonymous. That's what they have a First Amendment right for. She says, no, I want to know everybody's name. Everyone's got to register and give me their name. Then people started to push back, like me and Ron and a few others started to push back. Then she said, oh, no, maybe not everybody, just some people. Then the next day, she said, because that'll increase civility, because if you know your pastor can see what you're saying online, then you might be nicer. Still disturbing. And then the next day she said, no, I just meant the Russian and Chinese bots, not Americans. Well, what Russian and Chinese bot has a pastor that they're worried about? Okay? This is what happens when you try to be everything to everybody. Let me promise you, if I'm president, there are going to be days you don't like what I say. There are going to be days you disagree with me. But here's what you'll always know. You'll know exactly what I think. If you want to fight it, fight it. That's good. That's the way this country was built. Get out there and fight it. But beware of the person who looks you in the eye and tries to figure out what answer do you want, and then gives it to you. Because you won't always be in their eyes. Donald Trump is the ultimate example of that person who will say whatever he thinks you want to hear to get your vote. But I got to tell you, folks on stage who raise their hand and say they'll support a convicted felon, how could you do that? Shouldn't our standards be higher for President of the United States? An heir to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and FDR and Ronald Reagan? Criminal? Sure, okay. Because we like him and sometimes we think he's treated unfairly. Come on. You know, I'm going to continue saying this stuff, whether I get booed or not. Because you know what? I can sleep at night. I know what I'm saying is the truth. And so do you. And the question is, are we going to be brave enough to answer it? I'll end this long answer with this. I was at a restaurant here in New Hampshire for lunch today, about an hour away from here. And I was walking out of the restaurant, and there was a woman and her husband sitting at the table. As I walked by, she grabbed my arm. And she said, "Governor." I said, "Yeah." And she went, "Go get Trump. Go get him." She whispered. And I said, "Well, that's what I'm going to do." And she goes, "Thank you." I said, "Why are you whispering?" And she said, "Well, because friends of mine who like Trump yell at me when I say that stuff." I have a new slogan for this state, and I believe this from all the time I have spent here. Not only campaigning for myself, but campaigning for Kelly Ayotte and Chris Sununu campaigning for all types of people who have run for office, Republicans in the state. New Hampshire doesn't whisper. New Hampshire doesn't whisper. Enough of the whispering. What are we afraid of? He is a paper tiger. And the people who are going to yell at you on the street because you're for somebody else, let them. Let them. I don't care about it, and I hope you don't either. I hope you love our country more than you care about whether someone yells at you because of what yard sign you have in your front yard, or what bumper sticker you have on your car, or what button you put on your lapel, or who you say at a cocktail party you're going to vote for. Donald Trump wants a country that will kneel before him. He wants to be a king. And we fought a revolution 250 years ago to say we're not going to have a king, ever, in this country. And he wants to be a king. And let me tell you, if I was going to pick a king, it wouldn't be a guy who looks like him. I can guarantee you that. Who looks like him, sounds like him, acts like him. Dangerous. So, I think I'm on the record on Trump. Yes, sir. Oh, wait a second. Anybody else have a question? Because you went once already. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can you talk about parents' rights, about how schools don't give them what's on the curriculum? Mental health, physical health issues. They're isolating their kids from the parents. This is insane.
It's completely insane, and that's why I think we have to completely reconfigure our public school system. And I say that as a product of the public school system. I went to public schools in New Jersey. I got a great education there. I had teachers back then who didn't undercut what my parents were trying to teach me at home, who had regular communication with my parents when things were going really well or when I was stepping out of line. And it was a public school system that produced, I think, really good students and a good country. We have become a politically correct public education system in many, many parts of this country who believe that they know better than us. I think you and I would agree, given the nature of your question. Nobody cares about my children. My wife's here, so I have to say our. Nobody cares about our children. Nobody cares, loves our children. No one understands our children better than we do. The idea that some administrator in a school should be in on the fact that my child has a mental health issue or a confusion about their gender or a bullying problem, and they can know it, but I can't. But on the other hand, if they want to give them 2 Advil to my 14-year-old daughter when she has her period, I got to sign a piece of paper for that. How about we switch that around? Tell me about all the other stuff. Give her as many Advil as you like. I mean, this is the way it's gotten turned upside down. So here's the way I would do it. We spend $400 billion a year on K-12 education in this country from the local, state, and federal level. I say we need to turn that money over to the parents. Let parents decide what to do with their children's education. If you've got a great public school in your neighborhood, great, send them there. And let the money go to the public school. And let them support the public school there. If you think that a parochial school would be better, my wife and I went to public school, she went to parochial school, so all 4 of our children went to parochial school. So you know who makes the decisions in the Christie house. That's why I need to be president. I need someplace where I can actually make the decisions. But we made that decision based on the belief that because of the way schools have changed from the time we went to now, that we didn't want a school system that was undercutting the values we were trying to teach our kids at home. So we sent them to parochial school. But we could do it because we paid our property taxes and we had the money to pay the tuition. It shouldn't be a choice that only parents who have the resources to do it can do. Every parent, if they want to make that decision, should. Whether they want homeschooling, whether they want a charter school, a Renaissance school, we need to put parents back in charge. And the biggest reason we don't have that is because of the teachers' unions in this country. That's why. And it's not about teachers. There's a big difference between teachers and teachers' unions. Most teachers don't give a darn about their union. They have to pay the dues, they have the union, that's it. The union leaders, the only way they get more money is more members. And more members means only public schools, and only public schools that are allowed to be unionized. In my home state, we have 200,000 members of the New Jersey Education Association that pay $750 a year in fees to their union. And they don't pay a nickel for their salary, their pension, or their health care. It's $150 million a year as a political slush fund to influence people in government, benefit their friends, hurt their enemies. We have to break that cartel. And the only person who can break that cartel is the president. And you do it by using the money that we appropriate to break the cartel. And that will put parents back in charge. It's incredible to me to think that anybody would believe, and there could be exceptions to every rule, right? They're bad parents. Same way there are bad teachers, bad principals, bad administrators. So it's not 100% certain, nothing is. So I will bet on parents every time for taking the best care of their children than over somebody else. And that's the philosophy that you have to talk about as president, and you have to use the money to try to implement it. I think that's the only way to break it. It's going to have to be a mano fight with the teachers union. But right now, Jill Biden is a member of the teachers union. What the hell do you think's happening in the White House? Joe Biden's not coming in there and going, yeah, I don't like the teachers union. Forget it. He's sleeping on the couch. So, you know, there's influence in the teachers union right inside the White House right now. I guarantee you this. The people who will be influential when I'm president are the parents who have to make the same kind of choices that Mary Pat and I have to make. And I want to make sure that every parent has the ability to make that choice for themselves on behalf of their kids. And that make every decision. Not the Advil, but every other decision that matters. Norm.
We talked a little bit about red states and blue states, and my friend Andrea had a secret that she was going to share with you.
Oh my gosh, Norm, you put me on the spot.
Yeah,
You know what? He was thinking I was the only one who grew up in New Jersey like you, so he wanted to make sure we got a little connection.
All right, where in New Jersey?
I grew up in Killine. How about you?
Well, I grew up in Livingston, but we live in Mendon now, so we were in
Yeah, we're in the same. We go to the same malls.
That's exactly right. That's absolutely. Well, you know that being a Republican governor in that state was, first off, not easy to get there. Remember something, Joe Biden is not going to be easy to beat. I don't care what anybody says right now. An incumbent president is hard to beat. There have not been many who have been denied a second term in the 250 years in this country. There haven't been many. And so, first off, we better not be too smug about the fact that, look at Joe Biden. He can barely end the sentence. He looks like he's going to fall asleep at any moment. Believe me, they will prop him up and get him ready for this campaign, and the Democratic machine will get behind him. I'm the only person in this race who's ever beaten an incumbent. Not Ron DeSantis, not Nikki Haley. Fake hasn't beaten anybody. Not Donald Trump. I'm the only person in this race who's beaten an incumbent, and I beat John Corzine, the Democratic governor of New Jersey, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, who spent 3 to 1 what I spent with his own money. He spent $33 million of his own money. I spent $11 million, and we beat him. You need to be a certain type of personality to be an incumbent. And then you become governor in a blue state where there are 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. 1 million more. And yet, not only did we govern successfully, reformed pension and health benefits, didn't raise taxes, cut spending, balanced budgets, reformed education in terms of getting more choice for parents, charter schools, Renaissance schools as alternatives to traditional public schools. But we did it with the Democratic legislature every day for 8 years. Every day. And what it forced you to do was learn how to deal with other people. They got elected too. You got to deal with them. And then, when everybody says, well, all these things you're doing, you'll never get reelected. We don't only get reelected. We get reelected with 61% of the vote in a blue state, 51% of the Latino vote. Against a female opponent, 58% of the female vote. And I didn't have some, magic trance I put these people in. They voted for the person they thought was going to do the best job for the state, regardless of party. I won 26% of the Democratic vote. and 70% of the independent. So, you know, that's the way, it's the difference between me and Ron, the difference between me and Mickey. They were in red states the whole time, red legislatures. God bless them, I wish I had it. But I didn't, and what it did was prepare me much better. What do you think Washington, D.C. is going to be like under any circumstances? It is going to be like a scrum in a rugby game. And you got to have somebody who knows how to do that and to come out of it with the ball and upright. And that's what I learned to do for 8 years, and that's what I'll do as president. And you know from New Jersey, that's what we have to do. Yes, sir.
How would you handle the gun violence in this country?
You know, I think what recently happened in Maine, right, tells us a lot and gives us a kind of a blueprint for how we need to go about it. Because you had all the laws that you needed and all the notice you needed to prevent what happened, right? So if you show that type of mental health problem, the laws in Maine say that the weapons can be taken away from you. If people are informed about it, they have an obligation to tell law enforcement. They did. Both his employer, the United States Army, and his family told law enforcement about it, and they did nothing. My point is, I think in this country we have a sufficient number of laws to deal with gun violence. What we don't have is the will to enforce them and do it the right way. And it's two problems. One, it's a stigma. And people often don't want to come forward and talk about it because it involves mental health. And so what we need, I think, is two things on the mental health front. One, we need more mental health providers. We don't have enough in this country for the level of problems we have. You look at the number, you know, of the gun deaths in Maine last year, and I only looked at this because of what happened. 89% were suicide. Death with a gun, 89% was suicide. It tells you you've got a mental health issue in Maine, and it's similar around the whole country. So one of the ways I would provide for more mental health providers is we have this controversy in the country about student loans. Well, if you have student loans and you want to go and be a mental health provider, we'll forgive a percentage of those student loans. Because then we're getting something in return for forgiving that debt. We're getting things filled that we need, so we have more providers to help the people who really need it. Second, I do think we need to have more involuntary commitment. That's where I would change the laws. That it's difficult in many states right now when someone is speaking out violently and obviously has mental health issues to get them committed. Now remember, this guy was. So I'm saying the one in Maine was like a blueprint for what's supposed to happen, except they didn't finish the deal. But we need to make sure that people can have folks involuntarily committed for a period of time to be able to get the guns away from them, to be able to deal with the issue of their own mental health problems, try to get them on a track towards recovery, or if not, understanding that you can't fix it in the near term and have a longer term commitment on those folks. If I thought that like banning any particular type of weapon would get it done, I would consider that, but I don't think it will. I really don't. Look, you know, if we had banned, let's say we had banned semi-automatic weapons in Maine, this guy would have had them anyway because it was his profession. And what I learned as a prosecutor for 7 years was that criminals get the guns no matter what. We have the toughest gun laws in America, maybe us in New York are the two toughest. I was dealing with gun crime as a U.S. attorney, probably with 30%, 40% of my resources in the entire office, because it never stops. And part of that is the history here, right? We are a country with a Second Amendment that has been free about allowing people to buy guns over a long period of time. So right now, the best estimate they have is that we have about 350 million guns in circulation right now in this country. We only have 330 million people. So even if we stop gun sales of all the semi-automatic weapons right now, they're here. And I would not be for going and confiscating weapons, and I think most Americans wouldn't be either. So that's why I get nervous about the easy answer on it. I think it's going to be a slog for us as a country. And partly, if you look at what people say, there's less of this in other parts of the world, and that's true. I think part of that is the lack of a Second Amendment in other parts of the world. But also part of it is mental health is not nearly as stigmatized in other parts of the world as it is here. And it's more available and treatment's more available for that. So that's the way I would go about it. And I would end the answer by also saying that I recognize it's not wholly adequate. Like, I wish I had something better. But when I look at what the laws are in this country and what the problems seem to be, I think it's the best answer we have at the moment. And I hope that as we continue to see the issue evolve, we come up with better answers than that. But I think it's the best one. So, I am supposed to now do something else. I talk to these guys exclusively. So, if you want to hang out, hang out. I'm going to go talk to them for a few minutes, and then I'll come back and we can talk one-on-one. And I'm doing a town hall tonight in Hampton, so I got to get to that a little bit later, but I'll have some fun to spend with all of you. I want to thank everybody, Norm and Wayne and everybody else who put this together, and thank you for your questions. And I'm not going to leave until, I'll do it now and I'll do it again, I'm asking for your vote. We're within 60 days of this thing now, so it's no longer, we're not on stand on ceremony anymore. You're getting ready to make decisions, and I want to be your candidate. And I promise you that if you vote for me, I'm going to give you a campaign you can be proud of. I can never guarantee I'm going to win. Only Trump can guarantee that he wins all the time. I can guarantee you that I'm going to give you a campaign you can be proud of. So thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.